Hey everyone, it's Becky. It's been a long time since I have made you a video. I've been very busy. Graduate school is very time consuming, as you can imagine. I've also lost my voice a lot this semester, as you can maybe hear from this video. So I recently got into a conversation with an undergraduate student that I know who is applying to graduate school. And the conversation that I had with her, I thought was really pertinent to a lot of you guys, because I know a lot of my followers are undergraduates. The conversation we were having was about rejection, and that's something that you're going to face a lot as an academic. And I think this is an important conversation right now because a lot of you have either just heard back from graduate schools or are still waiting to hear back from them. So I think this is kind of a perfect time to have this conversation. I myself have been going through this process. As you know, I'm a master's student right now, but I was waiting to hear back from PhD programs. I was very, very lucky this year. You know, I got into every school that I applied to except for one. So I was in a whole different position, which is an abundance of choices, which is equally stressful, I assure you. But I have been in the position before of being rejected, and it's happened more than once. I think I've dealt with my fair share of rejection, and so even though I don't think that I am in any way an expert on this, I do feel like I have some advice or maybe kind words for people who are dealing with it. And you know, like I said, I was very successful this year, but I didn't get into everywhere. In fact, I got a rejection from one of the schools that I thought I was a shoo-in for, just based on my track record and my experience, and also how well suited I would have been to work with the supervisor I applied to. But I think what I've learned from this experience is that it's kind of a crapshoot, and I mean that in kind of the best way, and that you never really know what schools are going to be looking for in the year that you apply. And I'm not going to say that it has nothing to do with you and your application, but a lot of the time it really just depends on what the school is looking for at the time. I want to start off with reminding you that regardless of whether you got one rejection or 10 rejections, whether this is your first time around the rejection merry-go-round, or whether this is your 30th time, you are still a worthwhile human being, and a rejection doesn't say anything about you as a person. I think it's really important to remember when you get something as harsh as a rejection letter that it doesn't mean you're a bad person. And I've been there. I remember my first rejection. I have this distinct memory of kind of collapsing onto my bedroom floor and just crying so deeply and so pathetically, just kind of clutching the letter in my hand and crying. And a lot of that is because I was, like 21 years old or whatever. And so a lot of that was youth and a fear of the future and not having much of a backup plan. And so I think if you are feeling hopeless and you are feeling really, really dark about this rejection, it's good to remember that it may just have to do with all these other feelings you're having. What I learned from that rejection was that it wasn't necessarily about me. Sometimes it is, sometimes it's not. In that case, the person I wanted to work with didn't get any students that year. Another thing I learned is that it's not necessarily a bad thing. That rejection was one of the best things that ever happened to me, because then I went on to apply to work in consulting, and that's kind of where this blog came from. I became a better archaeologist. I learned that I really do love archaeology and that I'm good at it. I met, my first love. I met some of my best friends. I got to travel all over the world, and I came back a more well-rounded archaeologist and person. Rejections aren't always a bad thing. They can be the start of something really new and really important. And I think the third thing I learned is that one rejection isn't the end of the road. One rejection doesn't mean you don't deserve this. You shouldn't be a graduate student. You shouldn't, be an archaeologist or whatever it is you're applying for. One rejection is just one rejection. I've had a lot of discussions with faculty members about what exactly goes into that selection process, and so I kind of want to shed a little bit of light onto that to kind of help maybe someone who's rejected see that it's not necessarily because you're a crappy candidate. Sometimes you get rejected right out of the gate, or sometimes you don't have all the requirements needed. You don't have the language requirements, or you're an international student and they're only looking for Canadian students. Once you get through, you often get kind of ranked in many departments, and they'll put an actual number on your application compared to other applications. And so what I think is important to remember about that is you may be a fabulous candidate, but you may have applied in a year where there are lots of fabulous candidates. And so I think it's important to remember that there's always going to be somebody out there who's better than you are at pretty much everything. Sometimes it's a hard pill to swallow. I've always been top of my class in pretty much everything, but that doesn't mean that I'm the best. In fact, worldwide, I'm probably staggeringly bad at almost everything I do. And so the good thing that comes out of that is realizing that you're human and that you're not perfect, and that every application can be improved. If you don't get in this year because there was a lot of fabulous applications, take a step back and make your application the fabulous one. Another thing is, once applications are ranked, they often get sent out to the wider faculty. And so the person that is your prospective supervisor that you wanted to work with will get to look at your application. And sometimes after looking at your application, a prospective supervisor may realize that they're not actually the person that you should be working with. Sometimes you don't get into a program even though you're a wonderful candidate because there's no one there that should be working with you. It doesn't mean your application wasn't great. It just means they weren't looking for somebody for that supervisor this year. That being said, sometimes it is, I don't want to say your fault because that places a weird amount of blame in a weird place, but sometimes it is about your application. Sometimes applications are just not quite there, and they're not bad. Especially when you're young, sometimes it's just a lack of experience. If you've been rejected, I think what's really important is to kind of shake it off, as Taylor Swift would tell you. Don't dwell on it, but try to start fresh and try to be better. The first thing you can and should do is email the prospective supervisor that you wanted to work with. Just say, I was obviously disappointed, but I was just wondering if you remembered my application and if you could maybe shed some light on where my weak spots were, or if you have any advice for me for applications in the future. As long as you phrase this in a positive light and you show that you are willing to learn and to improve, most professors and faculty members will respond, and they'll respond with great advice. After you do that, I would suggest not necessarily scrapping your old application, but taking out the chunks that you know are good and scrapping everything else. Contact friends of yours that are graduate students or faculty members and see if they will take a look at your old application and see if they can highlight weak spots. But even more so, I would contact graduate students that you are friendly with and find out what their winning applications looked like. Maybe not necessarily emulate that, but channel that when writing your own applications. And then the last thing that I think you should do before applying again is spend that year improving yourself. So I took that year to get more field experience, which is where I felt I was lacking. And I also took that year to figure out what it was about my discipline that I was excited about, to channel that into my application. I tried other things. I moonlighted as a forensic anthropologist. I dabbled in lithics to see if maybe that was my true calling. Taking a year to really figure out your interests is important. But more than that, thinking of a good project for, proposing in my letter of intent, I think is really important. And I think having a year to figure out what you're interested in and what kind of work you can do and channeling that into a good application is one of the best things you can do when trying to apply to graduate school again. Sometimes it's also good just to work in the real world. It really helps you become kind of the person that will succeed in graduate school because you learn, all the successful habits of a real adult. And so I think that sometimes taking some time off is really important. I find that people, at least in my department, who are very successful are the people who are adults and have lived a real life and know how to make graduate school a job rather than school. And so taking that time off is really important. I hope that this kind of helps. I didn't write any of this down. I didn't plan what I was going to say. I spoke from my heart. I want to finish this with some kind of words of encouragement. A rejection isn't necessarily a failure, and that took me a long time to realize because I am a perfectionist and I'm very hard on myself, and I don't often fail. I want to look at it now every time it happens because it's going to happen to me forever. I'm going to get rejected from grants. I'm going to get rejected from, postdocs. I'm going to get rejected from jobs, I'm sure. probably a reality TV show at some point. This kind of thing is going to happen to me for the rest of my life. And so I need to start thinking about rejections not as failures, but as different opportunities. You know, every rejection means that I will not be doing that, but now I have all this open time to do something else, and let me channel that into something productive. I really urge and encourage you to try to think of graduate school rejections like that. I really did feel like it was the end of the world the first time around. I was embarrassed. I didn't want to tell my friends. I didn't want to tell my family. Just I encourage you to think of it, to reframe the rejection, not as a failure, but as just, you know, a different opportunity. And I hope that helps, and it doesn't sound like I'm trying to be some kind of life coach or something. A rejection gets easier. You know, you hate it less when it happens more. And so I promise this is not the end. If you have any questions, if you want to commiserate, if you want help with anything, I'm here. And if not, I sit with you guys with my fingers crossed, hoping for the best for all of you who haven't heard yet. Good luck, and if it doesn't work out, shoot me a message and we can talk about CRM.